Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson on Agile. A common question and concern is, how much do I need to know about Agile to do well on the PMP exam? The short answer is not too much, really. The longer answer is that we'll cover this material that you need for the exam in this single lesson, which includes when to use Agile, an overview of the Agile Manifesto, including its 4 values and 12 principles, a brief overview of Scrum, and some discussion of Agile as it's contained in the PMBOK guide, including a summary of the considerations for Agile sections throughout the book, as well as Appendix X3 specifically about Agile. The Agile Manifesto was created back in February of 2001 by a group of people that represented different software development or Agile approaches, including representatives from extreme programming, Scrum, DSDM, adaptive software development, Crystal, and many other different disciplines. These people got together to find some common ground and discuss their common interests, and came up with what they called the Agile Manifesto for Software Development. Although specifically for software, this has become the foundation of all sorts of Agile approaches, including Scrum. Agile is what the PMBOK guide refers to as a very adaptive approach to projects. It is most useful for projects that have a high level of unpredictability or uncertainty, projects that have evolving requirements in that the details of the requirements or the coordination amongst people is something that isn't fully understood at first, and an understanding of these evolves over the course of the project, or emerging requirements in which new requirements pop up along the way, or for projects that have a high degree of technical uncertainty about how and if this can be done. It's also very applicable for environments that are very fast-paced or highly competitive types of markets, which is why Agile is particularly useful for software development projects. The Agile Manifesto is a short document that begins with the identification of 4 key values that everything else is based on. These values are that an Agile approach favors individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It favors working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Now, it's important to note that these values are expressed as something being more valuable than something else, but that something else isn't worthless. All too often, under the guise of an Agile approach, people will completely throw out all process, all documentation, all contracts, all plans, and that is a mistake. It's not that these things aren't valuable. They still are. It's that the items on the left are more valuable, and that an Agile approach focuses more on those items on the left as being more important than the items on the right. For example, Agile still needs to have a plan. The way it approaches planning may be different, but there's still a plan. But the emphasis on the plan is that there needs to be a way to respond to change, to even embrace change, rather than trying to minimize and avoid change. Then, in the Agile Manifesto, come the 12 principles, the first of which is continuous delivery, which states that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Notice the emphasis on satisfying the customer as the first principle, and also that valuable software is delivered early and continuously, rather than taking the entire duration of the project to come up with something that is valuable. In other words, value needs to be delivered in increments that continually increase the capability and functionality and features of a piece of software. The next principle is welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. I call this embrace change. In a traditional predictive project, change is something to be avoided because it causes variances and deviations from the plan. And you put in all kinds of change control to minimize change and control it tightly, but with the assumption that there shouldn't be much change. With Agile, on the other hand, it's more of an exploratory process of learning as you go what it is that the customer needs and discovering along the way new things that provide competitive advantage to the customer, and then embracing those changes and implementing those right away rather than trying to suppress them. This is often implemented by having a backlog, which is a prioritized, rank-ordered list of all of the things that the customer wants, and the priorities can be constantly changed and new items introduced and put into their proper order in the list of priorities. Next is what I call frequent delivery. Deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to the shorter timescale. This is usually implemented using sprints, with a review or demo at the end of each sprint, so that customers and stakeholders can see your progress with working software frequently and provide opportunities for input and course correction. Next, we have business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is often implemented using co-location. The next principle is build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. This is often seen with self-organizing teams. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This allows for a much richer exchange and understanding, and co-location is a useful tool for providing this. The next principle is that working software is the primary measure of progress. This is very different from traditional predictive approaches, in which you have all sorts of reports and charts and graphs to show progress. Instead, what really matters is, do you have something working, and what's working, and how much is it working? The ability to demonstrate that you're incrementally building and providing something that works and is valuable, that's the real measure of progress. Next, we have Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. This is a concept that comes from lean manufacturing, the idea of smoothing the flow and having a smooth, sustainable pace that provides you with higher quality and higher throughput and more productive teams than having these occasional pushes and extreme efforts to get something done by a deadline. Occasional extreme efforts by extraordinary individuals is often praised and rewarded, but is a sign that you have a process that isn't working well. Next, we have continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. This is related to the quality movement and the idea of designing quality in. Having quality components allows you to be more agile. Quality components are more easily adapted and changed as needed. Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. This, you'll notice, is based on the Pareto principle. The idea that there is something essential, there's a smaller essential piece of functionality that is the simpler, easy way to do things that will provide you the most value. And simplicity will allow you to change more easily and to be more agile. Complex systems and approaches are often appealing at first, but turn out to be a real maintenance headache in the long run. Next, we have the principle that the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Rather than relying solely on specialized designers or business analysts, you should also rely on the expertise of experienced self-organizing team members to come up with these best approaches to providing solutions for business needs. And finally, we have the principle of retrospectives. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Scrum is a very popular agile approach used frequently in software development, but not only in software development. It's applicable to all sorts of different projects. Some of the key aspects of Scrum are the product backlog, which is a list of all of the user stories, features if you will, all put into a single list, and that list is rank ordered, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, with no duplicates, with the most important items at the top, and working your way down in priority. Everything that needs to be done is all in this single product backlog. Next, we have the concept of sprints, which are time-boxed periods of time, usually 2 weeks or 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks or a month, preferably shorter time frames. But you pick a time frame and you generally use that same period of time. Say you pick 2 weeks. So every sprint in your project will generally be 2 weeks long. Then at the beginning of each sprint, you have your self-organizing team review what's in the product backlog. This team will also include key stakeholders that will provide you the voice of the customer, of what the requirements are and the details of what's needed. This self-organizing team selects those items from the top of the product backlog that can be accomplished in the current sprint. The sprint planning includes adding any other details that are needed in order to implement these user stories. Then you have, during the sprint every day, a daily Scrum, which asks everyone to answer 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you planning to do today? And what, if anything, is getting in your way? What are your barriers? This allows the team, in a quick stand-up meeting of about 15 minutes or less, to understand what everyone's working on and to have opportunities to step in and help one another with any barriers or roadblocks. Then at the end of the sprint of 2 weeks or so, you have a review, which is basically a demo for your stakeholders to show them what you've done. And what you've done should be something that is of value, that works and usable by the users. Then you also have, usually at the end of each sprint, a sprint retrospective, in which the team reviews things that went well, things that didn't go so well, and to discuss opportunities to improve their productivity, especially identifying impediments which the project manager can take ownership of and work to remove. For the exam, you should also be familiar with the concept of an iteration burndown chart, which is a chart that shows how much work you start off with at the beginning of the sprint and a line projecting how much you expect to finish and have left to be done for each day in the sprint. And you compare the plan to the actuals by mapping every day how much work is left to be done in the sprint. For the exam, you should also be familiar with the basic development life cycles, the first being predictive, the waterfall or plan-driven approach in which you plan everything up front, you fix the scope, the time, and the cost, and then tightly control your change, and generally you don't have something that's really usable until the project is done, such as building a house or a building or a bridge or a freeway. These are often built using a predictive approach. Next, you have the adaptive or change-driven life cycles, iterative, incremental, and agile. Iterative is when you have fixed your scope, but then your time and cost adjustments are routinely modified as you go through different iterations or phases of your project. And these iteration points are opportunities for review, feedback, and the incorporation of changes. An incremental approach is iterative, but also provides something usable, although still incomplete, at the end of each iteration, and iterations are generally fixed timeframes. An agile approach is considered to be both iterative and incremental. These four types of development life cycles can be graphed on a spectrum from predictive on one end to agile on the other. The hybrid approach is when you use a combination of approaches, using more predictive approaches for those parts of your project that are more predictable and more adaptive approaches for other parts of the project. Another important concept is continuous adaptive planning, in which you don't only replan during scheduled iteration checkpoints, but throughout the project, you're constantly refining and improving your project management plan. When you have iterations, each iteration has a full set of each process group. Each iteration has initiating processes, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing processes. And these are repeated for each iteration. Initiating processes in which you revisit the project charter at the beginning of each iteration and incorporate feedback from previous iterations. Planning is often done at a high level at the beginning of the project and then progressively elaborated with more details being added to the tasks or user stories to be done in each iteration. Executing processes are typified by short iterations followed by reviews, which allow for greater stakeholder engagement more frequently, frequent retrospectives, and self-organizing teams. The monitoring and controlling processes are implemented using a backlog of prioritized rank-ordered items to work on, as well as trend analysis in which you can compare actuals to plans and forecast trends and calculate what is known as the velocity, which is a measure of the productivity of the team, and to provide frequent course corrections. The closing processes, by focusing on your highest business value items first, if you need to end a project early, you still have some value that has been delivered. Throughout the PMBOK guide, there are sections known as Considerations for Agile. And I've gathered together into one place here in this one lesson these different considerations and provided a summary here. One is the group of considerations regarding team members, in which for agile or adaptive approaches, these are dependent on more collaboration amongst the team members and stakeholders. These team members are more self-organizing and have more control over the detailed planning and delivery of the work. And team members are generally more experienced and have a broader skill base rather than narrow specializations. This allows for more flexibility in self-organizing teams and in assignments. Agile adaptations for scope include the idea that scope is refined as you go through incremental iterations, and the scope is captured in a rank-ordered, prioritized backlog. Agile approaches relative to the schedule include short incremental iterations, frequent reviews at the ends of iterations, and retrospectives, daily stand-ups, and a hybrid approach. Cost considerations are that Agile approaches generally use more lightweight estimation methods and leave the detailed estimates for the iterations themselves, and that if you're on a strict budget, you can use an Agile approach and adjust your scope and schedule to meet your budget as you go. Agile approaches support quality by having frequent quality reviews and by working on small batches of work at a time, allowing for frequent review of quality and making it easier to discover and correct quality issues earlier in the project, as well as retrospectives that allow you to investigate and improve quality. Resources include a focus on collaboration amongst the team members, self-organizing teams, and in an Agile environment, you may need agreements that specifically allow you to get a faster supply of things when you need them, using lean methods. Adaptive approaches support communications by communicating more frequently and quickly. It supports the idea of information radiators, which is the idea of posting project artifacts, such as what you're working on and your schedule and progress, in public spaces where people can pass by them and see what's going on with the project, as well as co-location that improves communication. Risk is supported by more frequent reviews, including reviews of risk, and by having cross-functional teams and the knowledge sharing that goes with them. In an adaptive or agile approach, sellers are often added directly to the project team, and stakeholder engagement is improved by having more active participation with project stakeholders on a daily basis, by practicing aggressive transparency with stakeholders, and this allows you to surface issues more quickly and have them resolved as soon as possible. Things to remember include that Agile is useful for projects that are changing, unpredictable, uncertain, or high risk, that the Agile Manifesto's 4 values and 12 principles represent decades of lessons learned and are the foundation of many Agile approaches. Appendix X3 includes discussion of life cycles and process adaptations. There are considerations for Agile in sections throughout the PMBOK guide, and Scrum is one of the more popular Agile approaches. For more information, you can consult these and other resources. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.